You ever notice something strange? We talk endlessly about boomers. We analyze millennials like they're a case study. We dissect Gen Z in real time. But there's this entire generation sitting quietly in the middle. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They don't complain much. They don't dominate headlines. They don't constantly explain themselves. They're just there. And that quiet presence hides something important. Psychologically, Generation X might be one of the most misunderstood generations alive. They were the first large-scale generation of latchkey kids. Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old. You walk home from school. You unlock the door yourself. The house is empty. Both parents are working. No smartphone. No location tracking. No security camera. Just silence. You make your own snack. You do your homework alone. You wait. By the mid-1980s, millions of children between 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. That wasn't just a social shift. It was a psychological environment. When you grow up that way, you learn something early. You can't always count on someone being there. That empty house didn't just create independence. It created consequence awareness. Because when your parents came home, you knew exactly where you stood. Rules were clear. Consequences were immediate. Step out of line and you paid for it right then and there. There wasn't a long conversation about feelings. There wasn't a buffer period. Psychologists describe this kind of upbringing as a high contingency environment. Actions and outcomes are tightly linked. Your brain adapts to that. It learns to calculate results in real time. That's one reason Gen X often thinks 3 steps ahead. They were trained to anticipate consequences before they happened. At the same time, they were growing up hearing promises about stability. Work hard. Follow the rules. Life will work out. Then they watched those promises unravel. Divorce rates climbed through the 1970s and 80s. Corporate loyalty began to collapse. People gave decades to companies and were laid off overnight. The rules changed in front of them, so Gen X adjusted. Some psychologists call it defensive pessimism. Gen X calls it realism. They hope quietly, but they prepare constantly. They cross their fingers, but they expect the rug might get pulled out. Because historically, it often was. That expectation didn't make them loud. It made them guarded. You barely hear Gen X on social media. It's not because they don't understand technology. They helped build the modern internet. It's because they grew up in a world where privacy was normal. If you embarrassed yourself as a kid, maybe a few classmates knew. That was it. No viral clip. No permanent digital record. So broadcasting your life feels risky. In their worldview, visibility equals vulnerability. The less strangers know about you, the safer you are. That guardedness also shows up as irony. Gen X turned sarcasm into armor. Make a joke before it hurts. Keep emotional distance. Laugh first. You can trace that back to the Cold War. Imagine being a child while adults calmly discuss nuclear war. Duck and cover drills in classrooms. Teachers explaining annihilation like it was background weather. When authority figures act like everything is fine, while implying the world could end, you learn to hold 2 realities at once. Everything might collapse. Act normal anyway. That tension produces adults who stay calm in crisis. They don't overreact easily. They've been rehearsing worst-case scenarios since childhood. Work is another place where their psychology stands out. Gen X doesn't perform productivity. They don't glamorize hustle. They just work. Paper routes before sunrise. Bagging groceries. Fast food shifts where you had to calculate change in your head when the register failed. These weren't resume boosters. They were early introductions to adult accountability. A 12-year-old responsible for delivering newspapers to an entire neighborhood. That does something to your sense of responsibility. And after watching corporate restructuring tear through their parents' generation, they made an adjustment. They stopped believing in institutional loyalty. They started believing in competence. They can't control layoffs, but they can control whether they're the most capable person in the room. There's a paradox at the core of Gen X psychology. They are deeply independent and deeply reliable. They won't ask for help easily. They've been solving things alone since they were children, but if you need help, they show up. Quietly. No announcement, no identity branding. That pattern started in childhood. When parents were absent, friends became infrastructure. Support was horizontal, peer-to-peer, not authority to child. That's also why their relationship with authority is complicated. They respect competence, not titles. If you've earned your position through skill, they'll follow you anywhere. If you're powerful but incompetent, They disengage immediately. They watched authority fail repeatedly. Political scandals. Economic instability. Public crises mishandled. Trust became conditional. Economically, they were hit more than once. The oldest Gen Xers entered adulthood during recession. The youngest graduated into market collapse. Just as stability seemed possible, something shifted again. So they diversified. Multiple income streams, side skills, backup plans. Not because it's trendy, because instability feels familiar. Security is not assumed, it's engineered. But there's a psychological cost. Research shows Gen X is less likely to seek social support during stress. Not because they lack relationships, but because asking can feel like failure. Self-reliance becomes identity. They are excellent in crisis. But sometimes uncomfortable with vulnerability. Before the internet, information had weight. You went to libraries. You searched physical catalog drawers. You waited. Effort. Encoded memory. Information obtained through work becomes more durable. They learned by doing. Fixing bike chains with grease on their hands. Opening electronics instead of replacing them. Trial and error built mechanical intuition. A belief that with patience and tools, you could master your environment. Now, they're raising children in a radically different world. Constant supervision. Constant documentation. Constant visibility. They gave their kids the attention they didn't have. But sometimes they worry. Have we made them too protected? Too visible? Because in the Gen X worldview, visibility carries risk. The truth is this: Generation X might be the last generation that fully understands boredom, silence, solving problems without searching for answers. Being alone with your thoughts? They're not superior. They were shaped by a narrow historical window. The old world was dissolving. The new world hadn't fully formed. They stood in the transition. They became the bridge. And bridges don't demand applause. They don't ask to be seen. They hold everything together. And maybe the most Gen X trait of all is not caring whether anyone notices